Okay, I'm having some difficulty hearing on this end. All right, so we have the Board of Aldermen and members of the Board of Education present.
Yes. That is correct. Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, again, like I say, I'm having some trouble hearing on this end. First, is that... Okay, there we go. So please bear with me. So Anthony Simonetti, before we start, first I would like to just echo what the mayor mentioned in his budget address, and that certainly we are still into some uncharted territories, and things are going to remain the same with the exception of, I believe, the Board of Education. All right, so if we can keep that in mind. Also, John Inglis, I have something here for Anthony Simonetti that he wanted to have read. Do you have the same thing?
I told Mr. Simonetti that if he could be here, he could read whatever he wants into the record, but if he's not going to be here, then I am not going to read anything into the record for him. Thank you.
Okay, all right, very good. Then I'll certainly respect that judgment then. Okay, so who are we going to hear first from the Board of Education? Okay, thank you, Kathy. I didn't, again, I'm having some technical difficulties hearing on this end. Okay, so do you,
Okay.
Hello?
Yes. Are you ready?
Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, members of the Board of Apportionment and Taxation and Board of Aldermen. My name is Kathy Olish, and I'm the proud chairperson of the Shelton Board of Education. I would first like to thank you for the opportunity to present our educational budget for the 2021-2022 school year. It is a fiscally sound and fully transparent request, and one that I can personally endorse. Not only is it a series of numbers on multiple pages, it is an embodiment of our truest needs and values, which will ensure our commitment to the education of our children in the Shelton Public Schools, their social and emotional learning, as well as their health and safety. This budget needs to be fully funded because we need to bring a moderate budget that we have been given over the past 3 years. When reflecting on what I would say to you tonight, I had an aha moment. When I was purging more than 70 pounds of Board of Ed agendas and paperwork from the last 12 years last week, I came across a document. It was the resolution of the adoption of the budget for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, nearly 3 years ago. The Board of Ed requested $74,873,729. A&T recommended $74,038,550. The Board of Aldermen granted us $72,765,000. That year, we had a reduction in force of 14 and a half teachers, plus reductions in program improvements, professional learning, administrative costs, to mention a few. Last year, our board requested a budget of $75 million or 3.19%. Once again, we received $72,765,000, which led us to mitigate over $3.1 million in cuts. A very distressing and difficult task for each board member, Republicans and Democrats. This time, 22 staff cuts were made and additional positions were eliminated or adjusted. By adjusted, I mean made half-time. Last year, we actually realized savings, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, and consequently, we were able to return $135,000 to our city at the end of the fiscal year in June. Additionally, unknown to the Board of Ed until late July, mid-August, another $450,000 in health care savings, and that money was also returned to our city. This year's request from our Board of Ed, $74,944,205, is a budget that will maintain what we presently have, and with monies available from the ESSER grant, we will be able to save our city close to $2 million that would normally be applied to capital improvements. I will ask our superintendent to elaborate on all that central office leadership team and our Board of Education members have focused on to save and scrutinize dollars spent, as well as our accomplishments over this year and last year. I wholeheartedly believe that you will find that our budget request is transparent. It is fiscally responsible, and it is one that will benefit Shelton Public Schools as we enter a new school year that will be recovering from the turmoil and uncertainty that the past year's COVID pandemic had on our children, our employees, and our families. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm very proud to stand in front of you as the superintendent of the city. As a resident, as a parent, as an employee, I'm happy to be here in person. Signs of, normalcy that we're going to move together. And the one thing that I've emphasized when I came on as the superintendent is we are all one community here. And I pride myself on opening dialogue and communication with the city and the Board of Education, because we all want the best for our city. And our part is to advocate for our students and our staff. As Mrs. Yolish very well articulated the position of the Board of Education, our budget that we have presented to the city is all about sustainability. We're not asking for additional staff. We're not asking for additional programs. What we are asking is for no further cuts. Over the past 3 years, as we have data and evidence to show, the Board of Education has sustained significant losses in staff, significant losses in programs. And we have to, at some point, for the betterment of this great city, stop it. So we're looking for the sustainability. We're not looking to increase, although the Board of Education and our students and staff would benefit from improving upon the educational system. At this point, understanding where we are in the pandemic, understanding the needs of our residents and taxpayers, we really just want sustainability to properly educate our students. We have opened up dialogues with the aldermen. We're here tonight for appropriation taxation and our citizens to talk about how we can all make this work together. This Board of Education has made significant movements to work with the city in an effort of collaboration and cost savings. And what I'd like to do is just highlight some of those that have happened since this board of 9, bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats working together to help improve communication and to find fiscal costs for the city. The first move that they made was hiring the board attorneys that represent the city. It was a move that the Board of Education adopted, but what it has done is produce cost savings on the city side and the Board of Ed side, and has produced more collaboration between the city and the Board of Education. This board has also passed a motion in which all unbudgeted items that need to be transferred within the lines of the Board of Ed budget of $1,000 or more need to be motioned and approved by the Board of Education. This shows transparency to our citizens on what's happening with the budget. This shows accountability in the spending and how we're spending that money. And it also shows the monitoring that the board is taking and the actions and steps that they are doing as a board to make sure that the money is funded correctly and spent appropriately. We've just recently, under this Board of Education, negotiated contracts with our teachers union, with our administrators union, and our paraprofessionals. And as members of the Alderman already are aware of, when they saw these contracts, they are at the lowest costs in recent years in working together. Mrs. Panazzo, our Chief of Staff, is here tonight and can speak to those costs that are saving on these union budgets. This also shows an effort on the part of the teachers, administrators, and paraprofessionals in trying to make this budget work. You're seeing less salary increases in those budgets, because they want to be employed and provide the best for our students and not have positions be cut. The contracts have also showed favorable cost savings in insurance, and Mrs. Bonazzo can speak to that in terms of what we've done with high deductible HSAs and how that has saved money for the city in the insurance that we've done in these contracts. One of the big aspects that I was asked to do when I became superintendent as January 1st, that this board was charged with, that I made it a priority issue, and I'm proud to say that we've done, is we've closed out all the building reimbursement projects with the state. And the city has already received some of that funding, and soon will receive the additional funding that's coming. It is our effort to provide the city the money that they are owed, the money that the taxpayers are owed, and in turn, so we can properly fund the full budget, city side and Board of Ed together. When I became superintendent, I also instituted a reorganization of central office. That reorganization instituted cost savings by elimination of certain positions and then hiring of new staff at lower salary rates and contractual rates. So in essence, we are creating as many cost savings as we can as a board. And recently, we did receive grant funding through the ESSER 2 grant as a federal relief funds of $2 million. That entire cost of $2 million has been put towards parts of our budget request to reduce that number, but most importantly, has gone totally towards capital presentations, relieving the city's burden of almost $2 million of funding projects that inevitably will have to be done by the city. We're talking about projects that are building-based in technology that left unfunded would cause higher costs later on and definitely burden the taxpayers and the city itself. But that money that was given directly to the Board of Education in this collaborative effort, we have funded and completely have gone to pushing off the accounts on the capital projects to alleviate that burden on the city. We've also looked at how we spend federal encumbered money in terms of title funds. And looking at that money that the Board of Ed receives directly from the federal government in title grants with title funding to help alleviate positions within our budget that would not cost higher increases on the general budget for the city. All of these actions have been done by this Board of 9, and I'm proud of their work together in an effort to save our city money and work with our boards. We recognize and we know that there are still more funds to come. We talk about the American CARES Act. That will be money that the city will see directly as well as the Board of Education. We know that money is coming. We recognize that's further money that we intend to use collaboratively with the city. But the facts are, we have not received that money yet. We don't know what the exact amount is. And one of the things that we do know, as I talked to Paul and the city has recognized, there will be prescriptive measures on how that money is spent. So we can't just say, because we're receiving additional grant money, we can offset the costs of the board. We would like to. We would like to work with you in the best effort. But one of the things that we're asking for is for you to make a decision to reach our contractual obligations. When the mayor made his proposal, his recommended budget proposal, a few weeks ago, one of the statements that our mayor said was, the budget that he's putting forth is to meet the contractual obligations of the city. The Board of Education is part of the city. We're asking for the same. We're asking to help us meet our contractual obligations. One thing that we know we cannot do with some of the grant money is to cover the cost of contractual salaries. We need to cover the contractual salary. Any money or funding that we don't get to that means that we will have a reduction in programs and a reduction in staff, which we can present for you tonight, the numbers of where we are with the reductions in staff and programs that we have sustained over the past 3 years. As I said earlier, our educational system cannot afford any further cuts in staff and programs. We'll work with that American CARES Act. We'll work with the city to try to work with you again. We had our technology audit done, which we just received a few days ago. It is our intent, based on once we receive the American CARES Act, to spend that money, the American CARES Act, on the technology audit. Again, that'll be approximately $1.5 million that we will alleviate the responsibility from the city to put in anything in capital. That is our efforts in trying to work with you. What we need from the city is the commitment, as the mayor said, to meet the contractual obligations that we must do, that this board made with these unions and bargaining agreements at lower costs, so we can not receive any further cuts. So this evening I am with our Finance Director, Rick Bellman, our Chief of Staff, Carol Panazzo, our Director of Curriculum, Kristen Santilli, as well as fellow board members that are present here. And I believe we have a lot of board members out of town, as I had talked to Paul, that they were making an effort. I don't know who actually logged in or not. But we are here and open for any questions that anyone has regarding the budget at this time. So thank you.
Mr. Superintendent, you said that the Board of Education's budget was devised by the mayor to cover contractual obligations, but you say that the Board of Education cannot fulfill its contractual obligations under the present circumstances. So it would seem that there's a bit of a knowledge gap there between the mayor's proposal and the Board of Education's position, and this is leading us into problems, probably continued problems that have existed over the years regarding diminution of educational funding for Shelton. It's hard to believe that such a gap would exist between the mayor and the Board of Education. It's a significant question posed here.
So to be correct, I am just going off do I need to speak at the mic or?
Good.
I didn't know for the online audience so they could hear. To address your comment and what you're saying, I watched in attendance virtually when the mayor made his presentation, and I was aware of his statement that said his proposal for the budget for next year was to cover contractual obligations of the city. So I'm using his words in a sense to say we have contractual obligations as well, the Board of Education, and we are part of the city as well. So the $135,000 increase that the mayor has proposed to cover for the Board of Education, the increase, is not going to meet our contractual obligations. I know Mr. Belding has some specific numbers if he wants to share with us this time in terms of what we specifically need dollar amounts to be able to meet our contractual obligations without any cost reductions to staff or programs. Mr. Belding, do you want to share that? Sure.
Good evening, everyone. Rick Belden, Finance Director for the Board of Education. For those of you that have a book, this information is also included in the handout. On the top sheets in Section A, you can look at what I'm going to refer to. The contractual salary increases for the Board of Education for 2021-22 are comprised of both certified and non-certified salaries. Those are the first two families that you'll see in the Board of Ed budget. And those represent about $1,179,000. So for us to, as the superintendent indicated, satisfy our contractual salary obligations, we would need to have $1,179,000. There are other things that impact the budget in terms of increases, things such as health insurance, et cetera. And the board would have to certainly go back and look at those areas to see how they can manage those if we didn't receive above the $1,179,000. But that's a challenge that we've had to deal with in the past. But to meet our contractual salary obligations, as the superintendent indicated, it's $1,179,000. We currently have $135,000 allocated, so you can see the difference is approximately $1 million.
So if I may follow up, thank you, Mr. Belden, to follow up in terms of to connect the dots per se between our request and where we have with now, as Mr. Belden indicated, $1 million. So this is where the Board of Education can make a commitment in terms of this American CARES Act money that we will receive in some timely manner. Our obviously initial proposal and the proposal that was accepted by the city was an increase of 2.99%. You know, $1 million is much less than that. But as I already indicated, we are uncertain and know from the past relief grants we had, such as the ESSER 2 grant, that we will be able to use any of the money we receive from the American CARES Act to cover salaries. We possibly and hopefully can use that money to cover programs. So if the city meets the contractual obligation of that $1 million, our request of the 2.99, the remaining balance, we're hoping to pick that up with the American CARES Act and be able to then fund what we need to sustain our program for the Shelton Public Schools.
Hopefully that'll be the case.
That's what we would like.
Ken, can you illuminate that just a little bit for us in terms of, like, what proposals in the budget now you think will be potentially able to be covered by the ESSER or the CARES Act funding?
Sure. I'm going to, we have the breakdown that, so I'm going to speak in general terms while Mr. Belden looks. Obviously, we all know, any kind of budget increase with the city, with the board, anything, the lion's share of that is salaries. So that's where we're looking at the salary cost of this thing. But when you're asking about what would be covered by the American CARES Act, this is going to be instructional supplies, program software, those are the aspects that we would need to do outside of the $1 million. So, and that's in the general terms. I don't know if you wanted to speak specifically about the difference.
We haven't had the opportunity to go through in detail with the board and our recommendation, but the types of things we'll be looking at is instructional software that we can link to social emotional learning. That seems to be one of the things that's impetus from the grant monies. Anything that goes for credit recovery and or assistance to students. Things like, summer school, after school programs. So we would take a look at what grants we have currently that are covering some of those things. We'll look at the individual line items. What can we do under the prescription that's in the American CARES Act to take out of our budget and move into the American CARES Act? So those are kind of things we'd be looking at, though. Instructional software, curriculum, PD, professional development, anything that we think can qualify with the guidelines of the grant. The one thing I will caution everybody on, and we've had this conversation, is any money, we get grant money, whether it's from the federal government, or Title I, or IDEA, if that money goes away the following year, you have what's called a funding cliff. You have your regular increase, you have about $2 million a year, plus whatever you use of that grant is not available anymore. So if we use, for example, $800,000 of American CARES Act in this budget, the following year you got to make up that $800,000 plus whatever your normal increase is. So not just a 2.99% increase, it could be a 4% increase, and a $3 million increase. So we have to be cognizant of that going forward.
Is that as a result of the minimum budget expenditure requirements under state law?
Not necessarily the funding cliff aspect of it, no. It's more a financial situation. Whenever you have grant money coming in, you use it to offset operating costs. The operating costs don't necessarily go away the following year, and then you're stuck in a situation where you reduce your operating costs, and if you use it for those kind of programs, then you're not going to use the software anymore, you got to get rid of it, or pay for it, excuse me, you got to get rid of it. So it does have impact downstream on our programming, or what we use that money for.
Has anybody looked at that issue of whether or not the minimum budget expenditure requirements are going to be impacted if you supplant operating expenses with grant funding?
The state doesn't necessarily look at that aspect of it. They look at the report that we file every year through the EFS system, and that's where we summarize all of our expenses, and it's audited by the auditors separately from the regular audit. And I honestly don't know how they would handle, because we'd be moving money out of our regular education into the grants, which we do right now, by the way. We do it for IDEA, we do it for Title I, and various other grants. So as long as there's an increase or maintenance of the existing amount, we're probably going to be okay for MPR. If we decrease the existing amount below what we're spending this year, we probably have a problem.
Right. Thank you.
Real quickly, I apologize for not giving you more information on the book. On the left-hand side, there's a big sheet. This book is organized by tabs, and all the detailed backup is in there for you to look at how we crafted the numbers from the individual line items to each school department, all the way up to the top level. And the sheet we have on the left-hand side is a big summary of all of those. So if you wanted to see, for example, what was in instructional supplies across the district, you can see it like by school, by department, and the tabs are set separate also. So it might be helpful for you if you're looking at it at some other point. Thank you.
I did have another question, if I may, and I don't know who's best to address it, but as I was looking through the budget, I was noticing that there seemed to be a number of places where certified tutors were being eliminated. Is that correct? And if so, how is that functionality being replaced, if at all, somewhere else in the budget?
So yeah, what I'd like to do is, I'm gonna invite Carol to come up.
Okay.
Carol, in her role as the chief of staff, obviously oversees human resources. And the heart of the matter right now that we're discussing and trying to really make that decision on about that $1 million covered in costs, in terms of contractual costs. Carol has a breakdown in terms of where we're going relative to the negotiated contract. She also has the data about the impact that we've had with the loss of staff over the years. But I think she first can answer your question and then maybe share some of that.
Wherever you want to weave that in.
Good evening. So to answer your question, Ms. Lobin, we have had difficulty recruiting tutors. And the reason being is that our tutors, it's actually a good reason. Our tutors were certified and providing good services to our students, but like all people on an upward trend, they get jobs, and those are teacher jobs, so they leave us. So it was hard to recruit and keep our tutors. So what we did was we created a position called an Instructional Interventionist, which is a certified teacher and a teacher who has reading credentials. And so we replaced our tutors, and this has been an evolution over the last 3 years. We've been replacing our tutors with this position. We just hired 2 additional instructional interventionists, I think it was in February, so that we are slowly replacing every school with either 1 or 2 interventionists to take the place of our tutor line. We still do hire special education tutors for our SPED kids.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to highlight where we've been going with our contracts. We currently administer 6 contracts in the Board of Ed. Our administrators, which would be our principals and our central office administrative staff, our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our secretaries, our operating engineers, which would include our security personnel, our maintenance trade personnel, and our custodial personnel. They're in one union. And then the nurses also have their own contract. So I want to give you a 3-year look at where our raises have been going. We have been trying to keep our raises close to or under 2.5, and the last contract that we negotiated was our para contract. That's a 4-year contract, which runs from July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2023, and in each of those 4 years, the paras would be getting a 2% increase. So that's 0.5 in each year, lower than our 2.5 ceiling. Our next contract, our administrators, that contract will run July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024, and the increases there are in year 1, 2%, in year 2, 2.3%, and in year 3, 2.2%. So again, we're under that ceiling of 2.5 in that contract. Our teacher contract, which was negotiated right before COVID, which was negotiated in the fall of 2019, those raises are a little higher. We have to remain competitive. While sometimes we are referred to as the Valley, we're actually Fairfield County, and we have to compete with Fairfield County because in order to be able to recruit and provide the best to our students, we have to be competitive in our salaries for our teachers. So those salaries are a little higher in year one, 2.9%, year two, 2.9%, and in year three, 3.1%. But I will talk about some healthcare concessions when I finish giving you this data. Secretaries, again, that contract was negotiated 7/1/18, and that contract is ending June 30th, 2021. Those raises are a little higher, 3.4 in year one, 2.5 in year two, 2.5 in year three. Our custodial maintenance and security contract, it's a 4-year contract that started July 1st, 2019, and will end June 30th, 2023. That's a 4-year contract. In the first year, our custodian, that operating engineers had a 0% increase, and the reason for that is the proposal included trading their health care. They asked that their health care be assumed by their union. So we pay the union bill for health care, and they agreed to take a 0% increase in wages in year one because the union picks up the full tab for their health insurance and they don't pay any health insurance premium. So they took a 0%. In year two, that was 1.75%. In year three, 2.25%. And in year four, 2.25%. Again, that contract was under our 2.5 ceiling. And lastly, our nurses. That contract started 7/1/17. The last year of the contract was will be 6/30/2021. We are preparing for negotiations with that union. Again, the first 3 years of the contract was a little higher. Economy was a little better in 17 prior to COVID. So year was 1, 2, and 3 were at 2.8%. Year 4, 2%. So those are our raises that you can review. In addition to keeping our settlements on the lower end, we've also made concessions. The unions have also made concessions for health care. So in 2014, we instituted the high deductible health care plans, which with a health savings account. So a high deductible health care plan, depending on if you're insuring yourself or you're insuring yourself and a spouse or yourself, a spouse and dependents, takes either $2,000 or $4,000 off the top of the premium. And the reason that is that the employee pays that first either $2,000 or $4,000 of the premium. And also, under the Affordable Care Act, back in 2014, when we began instituting these plans, we were still hearing about a Cadillac tax. So as premiums increased and insurance got more expensive, there was also the threat of we may have to pay taxes on these high premiums. So we did institute the high deductible health care plans. All of our unions have those plans. All Board of Ed employees, if they take Board of Ed insurance, have these plans. The board does pay some money towards the deductible, and the employee pays the remainder of the cost. We have also instituted with the teachers in 2019. Once they meet their deductible, now we've added an additional RX copay, so that generic, specialty, and premium drugs will have a copay, which again reduces the burden of insurance on the Board of Education. Any questions?
All these contractual obligations that you speak of, they were all included in the mayor's budget proposal for the Board of Education?
In the mayor's budget proposal, I'm not sure that I understand your question. If you could give me more information.
Well, the mayor proposed a budget increase to cover contractual obligations. Those contractual obligations that you speak of, were they covered in the mayor's budget proposal?
Is the mayor, I think Mr. Spearman said that the mayor had proposed $135,000, and Mr. Belden said that our contractual obligations would be around $1.1 million. So there is a gap there. Yes. So to answer your question, no.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Eglis?
What's the current cost of living?
The current cost of living, percent?
Yes.
I think it's under 2.
At the time of the last teachers' negotiations, where the cost of living was 1.3%. The teachers' union contractuals came out, wages were 2.9, 2.9, and 3.1.
Yes.
Which averaged out to 3%. The teachers are the largest bargaining unit in the Board of Education's repertoire.
Correct.
And consequently, that is the most cost impact, year after year, and the one that involves the highest amount of money that we have to come up with to meet the contractual.
The largest labor line, yes.
And the truth be known, there isn't much that can be done about it. And I agree with your statement that we have to remain competitive. And to hire people, our salaries have to remain competitive. But I just think that, unfortunately, we didn't, when the cost of living was so low, we had to overpay for a reason. That we, on the negotiations team, and I was an observer on that team, that we had little choice. So people should understand that it wasn't like with a gun to your head, but let's put it this way. You didn't have much choice. It was the 3%, the public should understand that the 3% that was settled on as an average number came about as a result of we had no other place to go. It was not a negotiations in the sense of either accepted it or we were going to have to go to binding arbitration.
Yes.
And that would have resulted, if our position was not upheld, it would have resulted in a cost to the Board of Education that the city would have to pay of at least $250,000 more, because we have to cover legal costs for the other side, paralegal costs, and court costs. And we decided that we had little choice in the matter. And I just think that it's important that when we're talking about funding these contractuals, some of these things we just have no choice. We just, it's a no-win situation. And from my perspective, I'm going to try to do whatever I can to make sure that this is understood by everybody, because all the way up with $1.2 more to satisfy your contractuals. So I want the Alderman to understand that. I want the public to understand that.
Thank you for your comments, and I know that you were there during negotiations. I'm going to disagree that sometimes in the negotiations I've been in for a long tenure, I have had a gun to my head. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. But no, we have very little turnover of teacher staff in Shelton. We have very healthy schools. We have good working conditions, and we have good salaries. And we have happy kids, and so in order to promote a good program, you have to pay. So, any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Are there any other questions?
I did have one other question, if I may, because I think that this may come up at some point in time, and that is the discussion of the increase in magnet school tuition. Can we just have a brief synopsis? And I did read the materials, so I know what's in your budget introduction on that, but it may come up at some point later in the budget process, and I thought it might be helpful for folks to just understand where that increased number is coming from.
So Rick can actually address the numbers. There is an increase with the magnet tuition that is done as a result of a state settlement that took place in the state of Connecticut, in which we are bound to pay now for tuition costs of sending our students to Bridgeport Magnet School. That was a settlement out of our control. We owe back tuitions with that we're currently, I have been in conversations with the mayor, and we are working with the city to get those back payments paid. But moving forward, it will cause for a tuition increase over time for those students who have the choice. It is open choice with the state of Connecticut. They have the right to do that. If they choose to go to the magnet school, we have a tuition to do that. So, Rick, you want to talk about the numbers?
Used to wearing that. If you turn to tab T, page 2, the detail is there regarding the composition of our regular ed tuition, which is the magnet school tuition.
You said what page?
It's section T, as in Tom.
Page 2.
Page 2. It's object code 5563 magnet schools tuition. We have, as the superintendent indicated, a requirement to pay tuition for students that attend magnet schools. The Education Center for the Arts in New Haven, the Regional Center for Arts in Trumbull. We have the 6-to-6 magnet school in Bridgeport, and those have been in the budget for a number of years. I can't comment on the settlement that's under legal right now, so we don't talk about that, but going forward, under council advice, we did include for the 2021-22 fiscal year the budget for the Fairchild Wheeler Magnet School and the Discovery Magnet School, which are run by the Bridgeport Board of Education. And it's $150,000 and $78,000 respectively. So the total is $228,000 that was never in our budget. So that's being added to this year's budget as our forecast. It is dependent on the number of students that attend, as are all these schools, and we typically get September, October, we'll find out exactly what the numbers are and the enrollments, and then we start getting the bills from the schools quarterly.
Thank you. So this doesn't include any back tuition that might be owed. It's just the forecast for what's going to be needed in the upcoming year. Is that right?
Under advice of council, we only included the invoice for next year.
Okay.
And the rest of it being handled through the settlement process.
And this is not something that would, under any circumstances, that you would be able to use grant funding for, right?
Not that we're aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
Without getting the specific guidelines in the American CARES Act, you know, and if they say anything about enhancement programs, because some of the magnet schools have a specialized program, and maybe we can, but until we get those guidelines, I'm not certain that we can use grant funding to subsidize tuition costs.
Okay, thank you. And also, I'd like to know why the Board of Education is not proposing to abolish the pay-to-participate program in this budget.
At this time, we do not have the funding to sustain our own budget and programs without the supplement of pay to participate. I believe, and I want to speak on behalf of the board, but there are board members here, and it is our desire to eliminate pay to participate if we could, but we cannot find the funding otherwise to sustain the athletic programs that we need without it at this time, unless the city was able to give us additional funding, and that we couldn't reduce staff and allow that. So currently, under the fiscal constraints that we are with the current budget, we could not do an athletic program without pay to participate. But it would be the desire of the Board of Education, if possible, to eliminate pay to participate if possible.
Well, I do think it's interesting that the $135,000 that's being proposed to be added to the Board of Education budget this year by the mayor is the exact number that was returned by the Board of Education after fiscal year 2020. And then I'm hearing tonight for the first time that there was an additional, I think it was $450,000 in healthcare savings that was also returned by the Board of Education at the end of fiscal year 2020.
Well, if we found out about it in, the end of July or beginning of August, and because it was not encumbered, it had to go back to the city, yes.
Well, of course, but that money, could be used, for example, to get rid of the pay-to-participate program and enable more students to participate in extracurricular activities. I find it remarkable that all of your contracts are settled, which is not true of the city side. Some of the city contracts are in arbitration, and the city health care costs that I'm reviewing in the budget are going up by almost 24%. And as I'm seeing the Board of Education budget, your health care costs are going up by, I think it's 2.44%, something like that.
A brief discussion on health insurance context I think may be appropriate. The Board of Education and the city are both self-insured. We work extensively with the broker, Smith Brothers, collaboratively with the city to manage our health insurance. And as a self-insured program for the viewing public, we pay the claims as they're presented. There's a fee that we pay to the administrator to do that for us, but every month we get a bill from the carrier, approximately 2 weeks after the end of every month, telling us how much the claims were for that particular month, and then we cut a check at the end of the funds transfer to pay that. So we're always on a lag basis for what our costs are. Secondly, it's very difficult to project what your claims activity is going to be. You're fully insured, paying a premium, you know what your costs are. All the risk is on the side of the carrier. When we have the self-insured plan, your costs could be theoretically lower because all the risk is on our side, but you don't know what your claims are every month. So we live month to month with paying the claims and trying to make a projection as to what the costs are going to be. So as you've heard alluded to a couple times this evening about in mid to late July getting the final numbers for the health insurance and having savings, that was a good news, bad news thing from the Board of Ed perspective. The good news was we had a savings that was generated. The bad news was the timing was such that we couldn't use it. And you can't project it. We don't know what our June claims are going to be until we get the information in mid to late July. And we're in the same predicament this year. The projection that we do on a monthly basis as we get closer to the end of the year tightens up in terms of our forecasting. But we still have 3 claim months left. And I've indicated to the board at our finance subcommittee the other night, I know what we spent already. I can trend it out based on budget, but we can get the same thing happen again. In mid-July, we could have a $300,000 savings. We could have $1 million deficit, depending on what happens. And we have to be prepared to address either one of those scenarios, and we try to do that the best we can by giving ourselves some flexibility with some of the cost savings we have currently built up. So that's the difficulty with the health insurance. We can't forecast. Now, what we have done is we've taken our trends, and it is better than we have seen in the past in terms of our overall costs. So we're forecasting a slight increase. The health insurance is at 2.44%, about $184,000. We'll continue to monitor that. We still haven't gotten our final renewal information from the insurer. We'll get some more up-to-date information as they get farther along in the process in May or June. And we as a board have to go back to that and adjust it. We have to do that in other areas too. Outplaced tuitions, for example. We have some people that are in the pipeline right now, and they have to be turned into costs in this budget going forward that we don't know about. Other people leaving. So there's still some fluidity in our discretionary accounts. And we'll adjust those accordingly here in June, and then come up with our final number based on what's allocated from the city.
So let me just be clear. I was not thinking that you guys were just going to find $450,000 and then turn around and say, okay, this is going to next year's budget. But I am saying that I think to your credit, you have returned money to the city, and that should be taken into consideration by the city in deciding what this year's budget should be.
So the Board of Education has to deal with its operation with certain variables, and the Board of Education should have some slack to deal with these variables, and shouldn't have a budget that's somewhat in arrears or right on the money. You need some, as you said, you need some flexibility, I would think.
Well, what happens is, the board, we meet monthly to talk about our expenses, and we do allow cushions to build up in our discretionary account until the latter part of the year. Instructional supplies is something we can control. Professional development is something we control. Non-instructional supplies. There are not a lot of discretionary accounts, though, in the Board of Education budget. We're a service organization. The vast majority of our costs are salaries and benefits, well in excess of 75%. So, for us to have savings generated, we have to monitor the discretionary type accounts, and then hold that until the latter part of the spring, early spring, and then see where we are. And then we either decide to use those funds as they were budgeted because there is a need for it, or we use it to offset cost increases that we hadn't budgeted for. If we have a student move into the district in February and $40,000 of special ed costs are now required, and we hadn't budgeted for it, we got to find some other line item because we only have a bottom line. We're given X amount of money to spend. The vast majority of it is committed already in terms of salaries and benefits. So the board, through the action of the superintendent's office, and my office, and the chief of staff's office, recommends to the board how we're going to handle that. And especially on this, insurance, I mean, that could be a big swing. You could have a couple $100,000 very easily be a swing where you're on health insurance for a monthly basis.
Did I understand the question correctly? Was the question a comparison between the Board of Education's insurance cost and the city's insurance cost? Was the question one that said that your cost or the lower city cost, which is it? Are we both the same, both covered by the same insurance? We both have the same expenses that we're going to turn in.
I would have to refer to the finance director as to why theirs is different than ours. I don't think the plans are apples to apples. You have deductible health insurance. I think you still have some programs that are oversight that may be different costs. I also don't know what you're talking about in terms of base. We were fortunate in increasing for the current year our base for the health insurance. Percentage increase has been going up. We're pretty close on our projections right now to coming in at this level, meaning for current year. So I don't project an increase over the budget. So I don't think it's going to be where both the city and the Board of Education are going to have the exact same increase. That's higher. So by definition, the percentage increase is going to be lower.
If I could just add to Mr. Belden's comment, I think the one major difference is that the plans itself, or the individual or family plans, are significantly different. As Panazzo pointed out, Board of Education has high deductible plans. The city, for the most part, does not. And so, though we're under the same carrier, and the claims are brought in together, stop loss insurance is shared between the city and the Board of Education. But the actual plans for an employee can be significantly different.
And that's a great point. The other point is, I'm not totally familiar with the city side in terms of the premium cost share that employees pay, but on the Board of Ed side, they run anywhere from, correct me if I'm wrong, Carol, 15% to 20% is probably a reasonable range. I mean, we have significant premium cost shares in our plans.
Probably 13 to about 20.
Okay, so 13 to 20% premium cost shares. That would affect also our calculations. That generates about $175,000 a month off our insurance costs because it drops that cost down. I don't know how that is on the city side. If there's the same premium cost
city side, uniformed police officers, do have a cost share of 11%, which is obviously in negotiation right now. So they're paying 11% of the premium cost for members who are in the plan. That is the only union or bargaining unit within the plan that does have a cost share. There is a provision with all other employees other than the police department that if the costs exceed 8.5% year over year, the employee is responsible for that difference. That did trigger for fiscal 18, I think, because the cost went up above 8.5%. And so the employees have been paying that difference. I can't tell you exactly what that percentage is, but they have been paying that difference. Frankly, over the last 11 months, they've got another month to go, and then that will cease. But that only triggers if the year-over-year costs exceed 8.5%. That's negotiated.
The other thing I would look at, John, is what the base is on a year-to-year basis. Because we try and budget our health insurance costs to be what we think is going to be the amount. And if there's any, like for example, if Paul says in that particular year it was higher, the expectation would be the following year your health insurance costs would go up to cover that. I don't know if that's what happened or not. In other words, you may be coming off a lower base and your percentage increase is higher because you're catching up to put it at what the level is it's actually coming in at. But I don't know the answer to that. That's something the city budget has looked at.
Are there any further questions?
Yes. And I think this is really my last question. Have you done any projections if you are not able to obtain the contract coverage cost of what would have to be cut?
We have not done that at this time, but we know that it would have to be at the cost of staff. It would be staff reduction. So we haven't calculated at this time the total staff loss it would be.
I know.
And I don't mean to emphasize the point. I mean, we have had such a significant loss of staff over the past few years that we don't even know where we would begin with cutting staff. There are aspects here that we are running the minimum requirements of staff and programs that we need to offer to maintain accreditation for our high school, to maintain special ed certifications. And I mean, this is not even into the idea that we do have class sizes that are large. I mean, that's just a general education thing. We want to reduce our class sizes, but if we continue to have to cut salaries, there are certain programs that just can't be cut. We're obligated to provide certain programs. So that'll be at the loss of the general education certifications, which then affects classes. So then you're going to have to cancel growth in the class sizes, which we already have, significant class sizes, particularly at our intermediate schools, that are over 28, 29 students per class.
Sure. Additionally, you have to remember, if we had to cut staff, we really have to cut more because most of the staff that would be cut are the lower salaried employees. So to make up that budget or that gap, it would take a lot more teachers or whoever, but mostly teachers because that's our largest population, and that's where most of our expenditure is.
And then the cuts would incur unemployment costs.
Right.
So now we have
teachers.
Then we're cutting more staff than we anticipated just by not getting the coverage alone.
Unless they get another job, then we're in for a high rate of.
I want to interrupt if I may. This has nothing to do with the budget. This has nothing to do with the budget. I mean, tell me what this has got to do with the budget. Absolutely nothing. What are we talking about here?
The budget that's been prepared by the mayor
Yes.
does not cover these costs. So that's the budget that we're discussing right now.
But the mayor did say in his budget that it has to be put more money has to be put in for the aldermen. They have to do it. And we talked here today and said you've given us a number, what we're looking at, 1.6 million, and that's the target. That's what I'm looking at, where we're going to get the money. I mean, I don't want to do the scare tactics. It's too early for that.
I was just answering the question, was the question that we were.
If there's a commitment on the part of the Board of Aldermen to cover those costs, then I think that's great news.
Are there any further questions?
No.
Are there any further questions? Are there any further questions? Okay, hearing none, that I would assume that this hearing is, adjourned for the night.
Okay.
Great, I want to thank you for your time, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for your time and your questions, and all please be safe.
Thank you very much.
All right, good night.